I had a parent ask why we run backwards with our athletes if they're not a defensive back. And I wanted to take the opportunity to expand on that and talk about all the benefits of backward sprinting and backward running. So a couple of things. And number one, when you run backwards, you can do all the ankle mobility you want. But if it's not within a dynamical system, if it's not within a system that is through movement, it's not going to be true mobility. It's only going to be static positions. So when you run backwards, you force the ankle to load in a proper way that's going to actually create dorsiflexion and ankle mobility when you sprint forward. Okay. Another thing, when you run backwards, it helps with the joint hydraulic systems. Joint hydraulic systems are joint fluid, soft tissue, order, and function of the joint itself. Those things make up dynamical systems that create that joint hydraulics. Okay, think about with your ankle, you've got your metatarsal joint. Well, first with your foot, when your big toe hits, you drop down, you have your metatarsal joint. When your heel everts, it means slide out, the metatarsal joint loosens. When it loosens, you've got basically your talus that sits on top of your navicular. It sits there and it sits upright. It's going to flip down. When it flips down, that's going to allow rotation of the tibia. When that happens, there's an activation from your hamstrings all the way up to your hip, and it basically teaches the hamstring how to guide the knee. So it's a very important function, the function of that metatarsal joint in your ankle, and running backwards can really help with that big toe flexibility and getting everything to work in the chain reaction biomechanics that it should. Okay. It can also help with common problems that people have called like shin splints and plantar fasciitis, backwards runs, backward jogs. If you are athletic enough to backward sprint, it is a huge payoff. It's a huge bang for buck if you can do backward sprints. So a little bit more to that, it can help rebalance the hips as far as there can be asymmetries between the left and the right leg. Say you're a rotational athlete and you're a right-handed pitcher. You're going to have asymmetries between your right and your left hip and hamstrings. Sometimes things will hike up one way or the other. When you do backward sprints, you rebalance that because it basically recalibrates your pelvic floor. It recalibrates your tuberosity, which is where the hamstrings attach to the pelvis. So when you sprint backwards, you're going to rebalance those things from the asymmetries you naturally have. You can't hide coordination going backwards between your right and your left leg. One leg is going to be more efficient than the other likely, and you can identify some differences and asymmetries and hopefully correct those. So there's so many different payoffs for running backwards. Now here's some tips, all right? Fall on what the good Lord padded. Don't fall on your wrist if you fall backwards. So make sure that when you do backward sprints that you ease into it. Backward walks into backward jogs, into backward gallops and reaches, and then maybe backward sprints. Big payoffs. Again, in summary, it's going to help with big toe flexibility, extensibility of the fascial systems, dynamical systems of the ankle, joint hydraulics. It's going to help load the tissues and really get true mobility in that ankle because you want dorsiflexion. And why do we want dorsiflexion? Because if you have great dorsiflexion in the ankle, you can access angles that make you sprint faster and throw harder. Those are very, very important to understand. So that's why we run backwards. It's not just for defensive backs. It's athletic enhancement. It's a great tool, and we will use it often at APEC. A couple follow-up things to why athletes should run backwards. Remember, in review, it's going to help with the ankle loading. So from a stability standpoint, it's going to increase stability. That is the most functional way that you could possibly produce it. And the mobility benefits for dorsiflexion, big toe flexibility, help preventing things like shin splints and plantar fasciitis. And again, when you're running backwards, you've got to go through the correct chain reactions and transformational zones of running. You have to have good posture. You can't run backwards actually running, not backpedaling, and have improper positioning with your lower limbs, or you'll fall down, okay? So what else is important to understand from that? Well, again, when your foot hits the ground and your heel's going to slide out, that's going to allow the talus to drop down and in, which loosens your metatarsal joint. It allows the tibia to rotate. When the tibia rotates, it starts activating your muscular systems from your anterior tib, posterior tib, soleus, all the way up. But remember that your hamstrings actually attach to the tib fib, and there's actually activation of the hamstrings, which makes it rotate the femur. Now, why is this important, and why am I getting nerdy with you? Because a lot of ACL rehabs on a high level, they'll have guys do a lot of backward running, even to backward sprinting and backward run conditioning. Why? Because you want to teach the hamstring to extend the knee, because that's a true function of it. Hamstring curls and hamstring curl machines are mainly for aesthetic reasons or to activate the muscle, but in reality, your hamstring doesn't really flex the knee, it's an extensor of the knee. Because the hamstrings are like reins of a horse. When you pull on those reins, you extend the knee. And you want to teach the hamstrings to do that. So when you run backwards, not only do you fix those asymmetry problems between your right leg and your left leg, either it could be a hip hike or it could be true asymmetries on coordination and or atrophy with actual physiology adapting to being a rotational athlete or something else. It's gonna even those things out, and it's gonna help with coordination levels between right and left with your lower body. And it's gonna help from a physiological and kinesthetic standpoint. So run backwards, be safe, but run backwards and run fast. One of the things that we found with our relationship with Dr. Tom House, who's a friend of mine, that we both are fond of backward running. Now, he's calculated that an athlete should be able to run 15 yards backwards at the same time they ran 20 yards forward. And that's something for all of our athletes to shoot for. And that's something we do with a lot of our throwers and other athletes as well. So get out there and run backwards, but don't fall on your wrist. All right? Land on what the good Lord gave you.